The Anderson Language and Technology Center at CU Boulder is committed to broadening and deepening cultural understanding. Alltech offers non-credit language classes in person and remotely to everyone year-round. Our flexible and engaging format makes language learning a breeze for anyone. So join a community of like-minded and motivated students who are passionate about traveling and experiencing the world. Jump into our summer session with a 20% discount using the code ALLTECHFUN. Learn more at alltech.colorado.edu.
Hi guys, my name is Christopher Pisacki and I'm currently a junior at the University of Colorado studying accounting and entrepreneurship, as well as being a panel ambassador for the Conference on World Affairs. In today's panel, Too Big or Too Bad, our speakers are going to explore how massive technology conglomerates such as Facebook and Netflix, who have disrupted entire industries, have become too big that they can actually be damaging to the overall well-being of society. Our speakers have a plethora of experience in this arena and will help us identify problems with these massive corporations and provide tangible actions that can be taken to help mitigate this problem in the future. Thanks again for your time, and we hope you enjoy the panel.
Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining the CU Boulder Conference on World Affairs virtual panel, Too Big, Too Bad. My name is Yamin Chen and I'm the moderator for the panel. All of the CWA panels are being recorded on YouTube and will be available to watch after each event on the CWA YouTube channel. The panel will discuss whether society is better off with innovative dominant firms or smaller firms that compete for markets. We have two expert panelists, Professor Jeffrey Bretner of the University of Colorado Law School and Professor Reza Ramadani of St. Michael's College. We will start with 5 minutes opening remarks from each panelist. We then have time for the panelists to discuss as well to clarify their views. At any time during the session, the audience may submit questions through the YouTube chat, and we invite you to share if you are a CU student and where or possibly share the locations you are joining us from. So the first panelist to speak will be Professor Jeff Bretner and for opening remarks. And Jeff has a very distinguished career as a legal scholar and as a legal expert that has advised the Department of Justice on many important legal cases, including the Microsoft case. And Jeff has also been involved in many of the selection of Supreme Court justices. And so I think we are very pleased to have Jeff here and share the views. So Jeff, please take it away.
Thanks very much, Youngmin. And it's great to be here with you and Reza and with everyone watching on YouTube. So just to open, so everyone knows, I'm currently also a Special Assistant Attorney General here in Colorado and counsel in the Facebook antitrust case. And I say that because the views I express here will be mine alone and not necessarily anybody else's, but I just want everybody to know that. So on our topic, to quote a well-known antitrust expert, Lady Gaga, America has been stuck in a bad romance with monopolies, and it just can't quit them. It's a love-hate relationship. I'm sure we'll get into both sides of that equation. Many of us love the cool new features and ease of use of the large technology platforms. And Wall Street certainly loves the steady flow of profits. But many of us also lament the loss of choice and privacy, as well as the content moderation policies and the ads we see, which may at times be very intrusive. So this ambivalence about monopoly goes all the way back to the 1890s when the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed. There were really two strains of thought that came together in passing the act. One was rooted in America's agrarian past and its appreciation for small business. The other, frankly, was rooted in our unbridled capitalism. America is hugely committed to free enterprise. So how do you strike the balance in dealing with monopolies? The balance struck really in Teddy Roosevelt's time, and that still prevails today to some extent, is it's legal to obtain a monopoly if you do so by what the Supreme Court describes as skill, foresight, and industry. But you may not either create a monopoly or maintain a monopoly through acquisitions or through anti-competitive means such as exclusive dealing, threats, or boycotts. That's a quick and dirty summary of the way the law approaches it. Well, I think it is almost undisputed that there is now much greater market concentration, much greater power concentrated in a few hands than there has been at least for many decades. Why is that the case? I think there are two main factors. One is what is probably now seen as a somewhat overly permissive merger policy in particular that was animated by the Chicago School of Economics. We can talk more about that. The other is that technology, and especially the internet, has created huge efficiencies, particularly in businesses with very low marginal costs, software-driven businesses. And it has enabled the creation of gigantic networks that become more valuable each user who joins them. And so those network effects and switching costs can make it incredibly difficult to knock off incumbent monopolies. There are opportunities, we'll talk about those, but it's probably too easy to acquire one. That's an issue in the Facebook, to use acquisitions. It's an issue in the Facebook case, as I mentioned. And it may be too difficult for insurgents to come in and knock off monopolists. With that, I will look forward to hearing what Reza has to say, and we'll dig in to the advantages and disadvantages of antitrust as a way of dealing with a monopoly, what the potential remedies are, and what the alternatives to antitrust are in our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And so our next panelist to speak is Reza Ramadani. And Professor Ramadani is an economist, economic professor at St. Michael's College. And his expertise is in environmental economics, international economics, and also has on antitrust issues. So he has been the department chair of the college, and but I think his most distinction is he was a PhD student at CU Boulder, and he got a degree from CU Economics. Welcome back, and certainly looking forward to your talk. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, young man. I want to start with two, if I'm allowed. I'd like to start by saying, when I was in Boulder during early 1980s, I visited King Soopers many times. And I was heartbroken and I was saddened when I heard about the tragedy a few weeks ago in Boulder. So I want to give my deepest condolences to the entire Boulder community And may God rest, may all those 10 beautiful people, may all of them rest in peace. Also, I would like to, as a former student of economics department at the University of Colorado in Boulder, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me again to participate in this wonderful conference. Jeff did a very good job talking about the good, bad, and the ugly side of a social media platforms. And if I may, in my opening remarks, I want to talk about my own experience growing up in the poor developing countries and what is happening right now in Iran and many other countries like Myanmar. What happened in Hong Kong? What happened with the Indian farmer when they were demonstrating against the wrong policy of the government? So the idea of web was to liberate us. And there are ample evidence that they have a lot of good by connecting people from different parts of the world, regardless of their degree of development, regardless of their income, regardless of gender, regardless of color of skin. But at the same time, we are experiencing a lot of challenges, not the challenges, but I think a lot also there is an evil part of the social media platform. Jeff mentioned about the monopoly. The social media platforms are what the economists call them natural monopoly. They are not like the utility company that provide universal services. But as Jeff also mentioned it, again, we got to pay attention to the economic efficiency. The natural monopoly obviously is going to benefit from increase in demand, increase in supply, the liquidity, and also can lower the search cost when there are few big social media. But again, as economists, we focus on economic efficiency. We want to reduce the cost, but at the same time, we need to pay attention to economic equity, And I think this is the problem that the giant tech are facing today. I don't think any of these social media platforms even could imagine as how powerful and big you're going to get. I don't think that was part of their business plan to pay attention to the negative side of this bigness. So with the monopoly, even a natural monopoly, comes a social cost. And I think that social media companies need to make a decision. And I think they have to make this decision as quickly as possible as where they stand on some of the issues like misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, and civil rights. Now, they are under pressure from inside and outside. By inside, some of the workers for this giant company, especially Facebook, these are young people, educated people, progressive people, putting a lot of pressure on their companies to make some fundamental changes and not just give a lip service. If they are not able or willing to self-regulate themselves, and we were talking about not a lip service, and use a playbook that designed, Jeff, I'm sorry, by their lawyers, then there is going to be outside pressure. And outside pressure already is there, is coming from regulator, is coming from politician, and above all, is coming from advertiser. So I don't think at this point they have many options to make the fundamental changes, and as I said, not to make lip service. So I want to make it very clear that, based on my humble opinion, this has been a valuable tool for a lot of people. We are talking about commerce. We are talking about politicians, activists. We are talking about news organization, but we are also talking about the average citizen that rely on their services. That's the good part. The ugly part is, as I said, what is happening with the misinformation, disinformation, hate crime, and I think this is looked like a double-sword edge. So we should have a meaningful discussion about what we can do. Unfortunately, we won't be able to eliminate the social cost of this natural monopoly, but we have the tools to try to at least minimize it. Thank you.
So if I may react, Reza, to a couple of things you said. First, natural monopoly for our listeners means, in essence, the market will sustainably support only one at scale. And I would respectfully take issue. And here's why. I think, in that there's, for the economics majors out there, a fellow named Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, who's a famous economist, who talks about kind of the economics of destruction, as it will, competition for the market. And every so often, and this is critical in technology, a new use case or a new technology will come along and make an incumbent vulnerable. Incumbents sometimes get dislodged. Before there was Facebook, there was MySpace, and there was Friendster. It is possible, but exceedingly difficult to dislodge a monopolist. And one of the things one wants to do is to make sure that at those moments of particular vulnerability, the monopolist doesn't flex her muscles to keep the insurgent network from taking hold. So that's a critical piece in some of the pending litigation. I would say that it is possible, quite possible, in my view, to disrupt one of these natural monopolies. I'm sorry, to disrupt a monopoly, because it's not entirely a natural monopoly at all. Second, and I think you were so eloquent in describing the problems of content moderation, whether they are misinformation or hate speech. All of this, from a biological standpoint, is the problem of a monoculture, where you have only one dominant means of communicating with your network. You care a great deal about what the moderator thinks. What Mark Zuckerberg thinks about Donald Trump, or what Jack, the CEO of Twitter, thinks about him, matters greatly. It is possible, and it is a debatable proposition, that if you have differentiated networks, some that have more aggressive content moderation and some that don't, we'll be in a world where we care less about the power of these moderators, and where those of us who have no inclination to see hate speech or misinformation will be free to do so. There are countervailing downsides to that. I want to acknowledge, but I think we are living in a world of dominant networks. It may well be that the disadvantages outweigh the advantages of having them be so dominant.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree with what you say, but the question now is, what is the solution? Again, I am not sure that we can rely on these companies when it comes to self-regulation, because in the past, they appear in front of the politician, the regulator, and made all the promises. They admitted they made a mistake. They didn't know about it. They're going to make the correction. And I agree, I don't trust them. Now, I think we need to come up with a system of check and balances. But my concern is when Elizabeth Warren said, look, it's too big to fail. We did these things with the banking system during the financial crisis. I know my beloved Senator Bernie Sanders want to do the same thing with the banking to break him, in a smaller, pieces, or downsize them or right size them. Now we hear the same thing about the social media giants or platforms. Now, the question I have as an economist, what is the definition of too big and how do we right size them? Who makes the decision? What is the definition of a right size? And I think we need to be a little bit thoughtful, be a little bit careful, and not make a decision solely based on emotion, Jeff. And the type of a policy that might make us feel good because we think we are the right of the, right side of the issue, and this is really help the social justice. It helps, for example, to get rid of the misinformation and disinformation. But what we need to do, we need not to rush and have the time and do a thoughtful analysis to see if the solution actually is going to produce the result that we are seeking. That's the concern I have. I'm concerned about unintended consequences if we rush and we break them in pieces.
I would just follow on both of you, Jeff and Reza. Maybe one concrete issue which I think is attracting a lot of attention is this issue of acquisitions, right? Many of those Facebook and Google and many of those tech giants heavily relied on acquisitions to grow. And those are sometimes called killer acquisitions because they eliminate potential competitors. So what would be the effects of those acquisitions? Or what should be the proper antitrust policies? Whether should have some prohibition of those things? And I would like to hear your views, both of you maybe. Start with Jeff, yeah?
So thanks, Young Min. That is really one of the most cutting edge issues right now in antitrust, is how to deal with acquisitions by dominant firms. I think there is a significant consensus today that the agencies over the last 15 to 20 years have been too permissive. I think that there's been, to some extent, a failure of imagination in understanding and appreciating what is important about these kinds of acquisitions. Often they're of companies that are growing rapidly, but have just barely peaked above the horizon. And I think partly that has been antitrust worries about false positives and false negatives. False positives are, if you block something, are you blocking an efficiency that might benefit society? False negatives are if you're failing to block something that is going to enhance the power of the dominant firm. Now, so I think the Chicago School, which I alluded to, was far too heavily tilted toward avoiding false positives and not sufficiently worried about the problem of false negatives. There are court cases currently testing the law in that area, In addition, there are proposals. Senator Klobuchar has one, and the House is believed to be writing one. House Antitrust Subcommittee, which is heavily represented by Colorado, I would say. Both its vice chair and ranking member are representatives from here in Colorado. Bills that would change the presumptions with regard to acquisitions by dominant firms.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I want to go back to that medium, the balance, I think, between laissez-faire, Chicago school, and I think people who believe, we have to come up with a heavy-handed and come up with some kind of a, regulation. I think with accusation, making, when these giant companies getting bigger and bigger, I think they also have to be concerned about the economies of scale. Bigness sometimes is not going to be profitable. When we talk about the huge companies, it's not when you increase the level of production, you're going to maximize profit. You got to find out what is the optimum size, what is the optimum level of output. So again, I want to make my position very clear. I'm not talking about hands-off, laissez-faire, and let's market make a decision what is the right size for this corporation. I think we need to come up with a system of check and balances. But I want people who are making that decision and come up with the right size of this social media platform, not to rush and think about the unintended consequences when we come up with that type of a regulation.
So there really, to your point, Reza, there are two models by which, well, let's say three models, by which this could be figured out. One is antitrust adjudication. Bring a case, undo a harm if you can. It has the advantage of being fact-based and decided by a generally objective, a generalist judge and subject to appeal in front of other such judges. The disadvantage is it's slow. And the tools are limited, broadly speaking, to divestiture, behavioral remedies. And those behavioral remedies might include, in this case, something like interoperability to allow emerging networks to interoperate with the dominant network. We can talk about that. And also line of business restrictions. And you hear about that a good bit in the context of Amazon, for example, where there is a concern that Amazon is both a merchant platform for the little retailers we see when we search on Amazon, and a platform by which Amazon sells its own products. And by the way, a platform on which Amazon has Amazon Web Services. And so how do you avoid Amazon perhaps improperly exploiting the information it obtains in one of those roles in another? Well, there have been proposals to impose line of business restrictions. So those are the kinds of remedies. Again, antitrust can be slow. Second is Congress. It probably doesn't bear a lot of discussion to point out Congress's limitations. But it is fair to note that large firms have large access to Congress, which may cause Congress not to reach an optimal result, as may the other things on its plate. The third model is an agency model, where Congress crafts a standard and delegates either to the Federal Trade Commission or to a new agency authority to set rules. And they may address, beyond the things I identified with regard to antitrust, they may address things like content moderation or privacy or how your data may be used or interoperability. So all of those things are in the conversation. The risk with regulation, and you see this argument about GDPR in Europe, is that only the dominant firms can afford to comply. And so if you have regulation that doesn't differentiate, you could be in a position where you're locking in dominance rather than enabling competition.
Very good, Jeff. I like those three solutions that you recommended. But as a expert lawyer who have been practicing some of this issue, as an economist, we'll talk about it. But I think you have a hands-on experience. You have been dealing with some of these issues. And as I said, you're recommending three options. Now, given the current political environment, which one of those three things, I can talk about my opinion. I like to say right away, I like the third one probably better than the other. That's my choice. But based on your experience, which one do you think is more practical? And I'm not concerned about rushing. Obviously, you say it should be data-based, it should be science-based. We shouldn't just rush because, this is something we have to do and make us feel warm and fuzzy, because then we're going to regret it. We're going to worry about unintended consequences. So which one do you think is practical, is doable?
So I'm going to give what sounds like a mushy answer, but it's actually based on experience. I think the answer is that you have a dialogue among those three. What happened in the AT&T breakup, by way of background for the viewers, the phone company used to be a monopoly. Then technology enabled new long-distance carriers, Sprint and MCI at the time, to compete on long distance. AT&T tried to crush them. There was a big antitrust case. It resulted in AT&T breaking itself up and agreeing to line of business restrictions. Congress then stepped in, passed a law, and set some standards, and gave the Federal Communications Commission the authority largely to implement them. Some role also for the Justice Department. Antitrust has the advantage of being much less politically sensitive. It also can put the dominant firms in the position of political weakness. If they've been adjudicated to be an illegal monopolist, they go to Congress not flexing their muscles so much as needing help, and as someone that Congress may not be as sympathetic toward. So I see it. I mean, each of those models has strengths and weaknesses. What you found in the case of telecom is antitrust created the opening, both for new competition. Indeed, many observers think the internet and cell communications were the result of the AT&T breakup. It created the environment. Congress eventually stepped in, and the FCC and the Justice Department then implemented it. You could easily have a situation where something similar happens with regard to the platforms. Alternatively, if the cases go the wrong way, in the opinion of one who is a combatant in one of them, Congress may step in and say, gee, well, if the courts aren't going to fix it, we will.
Very good. And if I may, ask another possibility, because as we know, it has happened in the past. The CEO of all this social media platform, when they got cut. They promised when they made those mistakes, they admitted, they said they didn't know about it. They're going to self-police themselves. They're going to correct the problem. And we hear about self-policing, self-regulation. And there are a lot of politicians, regulators, especially if I may say among Republicans, who are obviously pro-big corporation. They're saying, look, this is, at this point, is not government business. We got to allow them to self-police themselves. We got to allow them to self-regulate. You think that's practical, given what has been going on in this country, especially what happened in Washington, D.C. just a few months ago? It's
a great question. I think I think self-regulation has its place, but it is less likely to succeed the higher the stakes for a dominant firm. In life, I have found it's particularly difficult to get someone to do something that is not in their economic self-interest.
I'm with you.
And so, there may be elements of self-regulation that appear to enhance engagement, that enhance the reputation of the dominant firm, or in a competitive industry, self-regulation has a real value. But when the stakes are highest, it is not a particularly effective model. It has its limits.
Thank you, Jeff and Reza. We have some questions from the audience, so I probably, there are several questions. Perhaps the audience, one thing is interested in, and Jeff, you already mentioned the GDPR, right? So it's about how to protect consumers in those kind of markets when the dominant firm, bigger firms, from their infringement of privacy or abuse of consumer data. That's something maybe the audience questions are asking, and I would be interested to hear your thinking on those.
Well, I'd be interested in what Reza thinks. To me, there's a market failure here, that the users, by and large, are not fully informed about privacy harms, about the use of their data. There's plenty of evidence to support that. Regulation can do two things broadly. It can set the terms of trade. It can set the terms of trade so that I, as a user, have price transparency. What am I giving up to use these networks? That's number one. And that I think, Reza, is kind of classical economics. Then there's a more paternalistic view where you set at least some defaults and perhaps some minima about so that users are protected from giving away their rights when it's not in their interest to do so. So far, we've really been in the first bucket and not in the second. There's some movement toward the second, but very little. So, how do you protect consumers? Well, you've got to give them choice. If they don't have choice, even telling them what they're paying may not be sufficient.
Thank you, Jeff.
I agree. There is a problem with the social media giant and the traditional media. With the traditional media, obviously there is an editorial oversight. There is a system of check and balances. With traditional media, we have a choice as what I want to watch, what kind of article I want to read. But when we're talking about the social media platform, unfortunately, I'm bombarded with a lot of information that I have no control over it. And I think this is also again, Jeff is absolutely correct, market failure, because some of the user under impression, that this is free and free is always good. They are not really thinking about what is happening with the data that they provide to this social media giant. They know a great deal about us. They know about what we like, what we don't like, where we work, what time, honest to God, we take our dog for a walk, and they have no idea what these companies are doing with our money. As I tell my student, yes, free is good, but there is nothing free in life. Somebody is going to pay for it. And that's the reason this company is making trillions of dollars through advertising by using our data, our sensitive data. And if I may say very quickly, Jeff, I think last week, that was a bridge of what, 500 33 million users of Facebook. Sensitive information was all over the web, free of charge. And we are not talking about only the name, the email, and a lot of other sensitive issues. And I think that's becoming a major issue. And again, as I understand, they are big corporation, they are concerned about self-interest, but as an individual consumer, also I believe in some sense of personal responsibility. When you put that information there, everybody is going to have access to it. So we cannot blame only the big bad corporations.
So let me follow up on this. Right, there are several issues. One is, if you look at those big companies, they actually do have those privacy policies all listed on their website, right? But one difficulty is that's what they call notice and consent. Now, the one difficulty with those is that you may not have a choice. Jeff was mentioned that, if you don't have a choice, you have a problem, because if you don't use Google, what else do you use to search, right? So that is one issue. And another issue is that consumers may have, they may not know, or it's costly to know, and people just accept without actually reading all these privacy policies. And the third question is, what is the penalty? If, as Reza just said, if all the information was breached, and how to hold those companies accountable? I think those are kind of interesting issues. I would be interested to hear, Jeff and Reza, your opinions.
Well, the penalties, as you put it, Young Min, are to these large firms merely a cost of doing business. The FTC several years ago settled with Facebook over the Cambridge Analytica breach. Facebook paid $5 billion and obtained an extremely broad set of releases from the FTC. There is other litigation that my office has looked at that I can't really get into, but there are others seeking relief around that. But the point is that it has to be more than a cost of doing business in order for it to be effective. The privacy regime that we have in the United States, by and large, is the result of sort of quirky jurisdiction that the Federal Trade Commission has. And so it's all based, as you alluded to, Young Min, on those terms of service that we click through mechanically and never think about again. And it's not a very rigorous enforcement regime. And the people involved in it would be the first to agree with that. So we are headed, in my opinion, ultimately to a more robust privacy regime. But what the remedies will be is a very, very open question.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. The enforcement is not strong enough. And I agree, they look at it as a cost of doing business. When you look at this corporation making $billion or $1 billion, the small price they pay is a slap on the wrist. And I think they have gotten away with a lot of this misbehaving, a social cost so many times that I'm afraid we are giving a lip service and we are encouraging bad behavior among these companies. But I think it's time for us, as I said, have a serious discussion. I don't know what kind of a self-policing is okay, but I think we need to come up with the pressure from outside and be serious about the type of consequences that this company are going to face, and not only give a lip service. I don't know, maybe just go after one of them, say, look, you did this, we gave you plenty of time for self-policing, it didn't work, now we're coming after you.
So here's a question from the audience. Should these tech companies enjoy the privilege traditional media companies do not enjoy, in the sense do not be liable for the content on their platforms? Any thoughts?
Quick answer for me is we should treat them the same way. They should. Okay. They have done a great job. Honestly, God, they're liberating a lot of people. I give them a lot of credit, but at the same time, they brought a lot of pain and suffering to a lot of people. And we should follow the same rule that we use for the traditional media.
So this is the Section 230 question that you were posing, Youngmin, and it is a really hard one, in my opinion. I'm generally sympathetic to what Reza just said, that there have to be consequences around incitement, around inciting hatred. Congress has already stepped in selected areas, including sex trafficking on the platforms. But, there is a tension here, and we should acknowledge it, that the broad sharing that liberation movements around the world engage in, that is generally a great benefit to humanity, occur when there is not, censorship, including self-censorship. And, if there is no question, and Reza, you're the economist, that these rules will reduce the amount of content that is shared. Most of that will be content that I'm happy will not be shared, but there will be false positives. There will be, and there is now. I mean, you read, that Facebook took down a post about breast cancer because it included the word breast, and that's just a small, although important, example of the problem of false positives. So the conversation's ongoing. Justice Thomas jumped in, frankly, with both feet on Monday. In a case he didn't have to raise the point. I think he was trying to stir up this very debate. We're, in my opinion, still in the first or second inning of that one.
Jeff, I'm very sympathetic about, what you said, and I'm very careful when I make this statement that I say we've got to treat them like traditional media. But as you know, anytime as an economist or as an individual, we make a decision, there is going to be a cost. There is going to be unintended consequences. But if we really do not come up with a solution for what is happening, for example, what happened in Washington, D.C. a few months ago, with the misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, then what is the solution? What is the solution? Then again, because we got to then hands off and let them, continue business as usual, because I don't think, honestly, God, they have the incentive at this point, and they mean what they say. So there has to be some outside pressure.
I agree. There's a quote from a different context, although it actually involved incitement. A Supreme Court justice named Robert Jackson, one of the most eloquent ones, who said the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Mm-hmm. And in essence, if we allow incitement to go unchecked, real incitement, not free speech, but real incitement, there is danger in that. And I have a strong libertarian bent, but we as a society have to work to strike the right balance here. And it is a super, super hard question.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I want to return to the issue of maybe think about, what's the trade-off between those dominant firms and smaller firms that compete. That I think one big issue is that in those markets, it's different from the traditional markets where the concern for the dominant firm is higher prices. And here, many of those firms actually provide a free service for the basic products. And so it's more issues with consumer protection, such as data protection, privacy protection, or more of a dynamic issue is the innovation, right? In the long run, the industry is going to be more innovative and under those kind of dominance, or can we think about better way to promote innovation in those markets? So I think I'll be interested in hear your views on those. Jeff.
So Youngmin, that is a great question, and it's one where there has tended to be a one-sided conversation, in the sense that the dominant firms boast with justification about their innovation. But what we as a society should be concerned about, I would submit, is aggregate innovation. Total innovation on the platforms and innovation around the platforms. And there is evidence that I'll just talk about Facebook for the moment, that it has deterred innovation in certain places because of its practices. There's discussion about that in other cases. So, the rules we need to set as a society should be rules that maximize total innovation. There was actually a Supreme Court decision yesterday by Justice Breyer on copyright involving Google and Oracle, and a pretty good argument that Justice Breyer got it right by saying that programmers have fair use for what are called code that invokes APIs, because what you want to make sure society has as much generation of wealth and ideas and creativity as possible. It's not just the original creator. It's not just the dominant platform.
Thank you. So I think that's really interesting. Maybe I just follow on that. Maybe that's, so obviously we understand the trade-off there, and but I go back to a particular policy issues, as we studied, it's the acquisitions, right? Because some firms say we allowing us to acquire smaller firms or even competitors, maybe actually it's good for the innovation, because in the dynamic sense, that's where those firms to start with, right? Firms, entrepreneurs want to start their companies or innovation because they want to have that option to be acquired by larger firms. And so if you think about the dynamic incentives, that's an argument that you want to have less prohibitive antitrust against acquisition. So I think it would be interesting to hear your views on those.
I think you're absolutely correct. I don't think, the innovation will take place only with the monopoly. The innovation can happen, also, when there is a competition among the firms. But one thing, we also got to remember, when we're talking about innovation by any company, if it's a monopoly, or we were talking about, when we have a competition, what role government is going to play, especially when we are talking about, well, if you're coming with innovating idea, when it's copyrighted, we're talking about what will happen if other countries are going to illegally, access that innovative idea. So I think the government should play a role when we're talking about this innovation. And when Jeff especially talking about it as a maximum total innovation, it's not only for a segment of a society, the type of innovation we need to come up with that is going to really affect all of us, regardless of our income, regardless of our level of education, especially in this climate in the United States and many other countries.
So Youngmin, I mean, it's a significant point, which is, if a dominant firm cannot acquire a startup, I think, as you were describing, does that mean that there'll be less investment in startups? And I think the devil's in the details. There are some that clearly don't have antitrust significance. It's a differentiated situation. If Apple acquires a social network, just to take a counterfactual, we would be more supportive of that than if Facebook did. Why? Because Facebook's dominant in that space. If an acquisition enabled Apple to compete with Facebook and social networks, maybe that would be a good thing. So, you know, the one thing I will say is that most of these dominant firms have gigantic R&D budgets and the ability to build what they can't buy. They may not do as good a job as the acquisition that they're targeting, but it's not black and white. It's not black and white.
Thank you. I do think those are complex issues, right? It's not there is no easy solution, and it's a context specific, and you have to conduct careful economic analysis, legal analysis. That's true. So I think we still have a few minutes. I guess we could come back to antitrust possible remedies or enforcement by the agencies. You know, Jeff, you have a lot of experience on that. You think? We had a question. Somebody was asking from our audience, you know, whether the agencies will be able to have the resources to enforce those things in this environment. What do you think about?
That is an issue on several levels, Youngmin. I think there's a political consensus now to increase dramatically the amount that the agencies have, but that tends to be cyclical, and you know. There are challenges constantly, but it's not just financial resources, because the agencies need two things that they don't traditionally have a lot of. One is technological expertise. There have been limited efforts over the years to augment that at the agencies. In my personal opinion, there is much, much, much more that could be done about that. And, you know, my preferred solution may not be permanent positions, but bringing in people for 2, 3, 4 year stints, because that's how you get great people who are really current. So that's an issue. The second thing is the agencies don't have the data flow they need about what's really going on in these companies day to day. They're only seeing what they're being told, and they're only being told what's in somebody's interest to tell them, yes, by and large. And so, you know, I am of the view that the agencies need more ongoing looks at the acquisitions, because I guarantee you, pick any of these companies, they're filled with brilliant people. They are thinking about things and strategies today that the agencies might not tumble upon for some time.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Another thing you touched up on actually was on yesterday's Supreme Court decision. I noticed that you have worked on both antitrust and intellectual property rights. And any thoughts about how those two things interact and in those issues? I know this is a big question, and probably a lot of things you can. There much more time you need to talk about those issues.
You know, it's a very fertile area of the law. I think incumbents tend to try to use intellectual property to forestall competition quite often. I think you need just enough intellectual property protection to maximize creative investment and no more, because you want people to have the benefit of others' ideas, at least in the copyright realm. Patents are a little more exclusive. Once you have the idea, you have a relatively brief 17 to 20 year period when it's yours exclusively. But in the copyright realm, it's important that ideas can be used. And that was I think, one of the root sentiments in Justice Breyer's opinion yesterday.
Thank you. Well, perfect. We have, according to the schedule, we are just getting to the conclusion time. And so this has been a really thought-provoking discussion. And I really want to thank first of all, the audience for the participation, but more especially to both of you as providing your expert views on many interesting issues. And I do think this issue of dominant firms and competition, especially in this context of tech giants or digital economy, is really important. And I hope we will have the opportunity to discuss again sometime later. Yeah. So I am actually, this is the first time participating in this CWA, and I guess the format at this point, whether you know a little bit in participant at this point, whether we can continue or we will typical. I'm the moderator, but I'm now going to ask you.
I think at this point, I think what I have done in the past, I want to thank you for doing a great job, and I want to thank Jeff and Chris and other people who were involved, with this session. I learned a great deal, and I'm hoping, one of these days I can come to beautiful Boulder and meet all of you in person. So thank you very much for everything. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this session. Thank you.
Youngmin and Reza, thank you so much. It's been an honor to be with you.
Was great. This was great.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. And so I think we have the final statements I'm supposed to say is that the CWA relies on the generosity of people to make of you like you to make this event possible. So please consider making gift to the CWA, which can also be done on the CWA website. And tune in through Sunday, April 11th. For live CWA events or catch up on those you missed on the CWA YouTube channel. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Jeff and Reza, again, and nice talking to you. Okay, bye-bye.